We're sitting here stuck in neutral. This is a huge problem for us.
We've treated these kinds of cabinet meetings as a suck-up story for years now. Is that missing the real point?
Can Democrats actually win Texas this year?
How much political risk is this creating for Trump and for the Republicans? It's Political Rehab, where PTI meets The Daily Show this week. Deal or delusion in the Middle East with the world economy on the brink of collapse, a Texas crush that could sink the Republican Senate and could take down the Trump cabinet with it, and Trump's mysterious medical situation, which raises the question of whether he's lost all touch with reality. And finally, a deep dive into the real truth underneath the Democratic autopsy report. This is normally where we'd each dump on Trump for a minute, but it seems like we'll have more than our recommended daily allowance of Trump today. So let's get straight to our rundown. Over the weekend, Trump abruptly stayed in Washington instead of going to Bedminster or attending his son's wedding. So weird. As reports swirled that an Iran deal was imminent, Trump claimed an agreement had been largely negotiated and then suggested an announcement could come shortly. But within hours, administration messaging shifted again toward threats, blockades, and warnings that Iran should not try to outweight him politically. Analysts were calling any deal a huge loss for America in the war. By Thursday morning, there was a renewed exchange of bombs. The result is a growing sense that there's really no end in sight as economic experts raise the prospect that the biggest price pain is still ahead, regardless of whether we strike a permanent deal. Matt, how much political risk is this protracted negotiation creating for Trump and for the Republicans?
First of all, Trump just needs to quit lying to the American people. One day we have a deal, this is almost done, but now we're blowing up more things. We're threatening some other allies in the area that if they don't cooperate, we're going to blow them up too. I talk to a lot of Republicans every single day, and the worry here is that this is going to keep going on and on. I made a comment just this weekend. I said, this has to be done by Labor Day. And the first response was, God, I hope this is before then, because everybody is starting to realize that the longer this happens with no answers and no clear direction, that it's not just hurting our chances in the midterms, it's actually slowly eroding this economy to a point that's going to be tough to ever dig back out.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that point with some numbers. We're actually going to feature the guy who wrote about this on my live stream. So subscribe here, Worth Knowing YouTube. Sulfur prices reportedly jumped from about $650 per metric ton before the conflict to over $1,000. That's a 63% increase. That flows directly into supply chains, into fertilizer production. That means that we have a massive spike in food prices up ahead in the future, in 6 months, in 9 months. 6 months is really difficult time politically. Petrochemical prices already surging. You see this across all kinds of commodities. And the thing that's really troubling is that we are burning down inventories of these key commodity inputs to our economy rapidly. And the flow of backfill into those inventories is currently stalled. So even if we reach some kind of a long-term ceasefire or peace deal, the economic pain is going to continue to spool out for months and months to come. And the worst of it could hit right around Election Day. I think this is a looming disaster for our economy. And politically, I think it's even worse for the Republicans.
Yeah, and that's why Trump just has to be honest with the American people. But unfortunately, he's been too consumed with other things. For example, this week in Texas, we saw Ken Paxton trounce, I mean, trounce the incumbent John Cornyn after Trump endorsed him. Now, MAGA was giddy with excitement. They claimed another scalp. Democrats, I think, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, were equally giddy because they got the candidate they wanted. Cook Political Report shifted the Texas Senate race. This is Texas, ladies and gentlemen, towards Democrats after Paxton won. Tallarico raised a shit ton of money after this victory. Matt, can Democrats actually win Texas this year?
Yeah, Tallarico raised $600,000 in 2 hours after the victory. Can they? Yes. Are they likely to? I still think it's the hardest stretch, including Alaska, of these kinds of marginal Senate races. It's just difficult territory. But look, the bigger repercussion, the ripple effect that you know all too well as a Republican political consultant is that people in your line of work and my former line of work look at where to deploy resources. And you're already seeing quotes from people like Steve Bannon coming out and saying, yeah, I think we're going to pull Texas out, but it's going to be a huge slog and we're going to have to devote a lot of resources to it. That's going to rob resources on the Republican side from places like Ohio, North Carolina, Maine, the seats that they have to defend, where Democrats are surging and are currently ahead in the polls. So even if Democrats don't win in Texas, simply by having Paxton as their nominee, Republicans are going to have so many resources tied up. It's a little bit like the classic film, The Great Escape, where captured service members in World War II try to break out of prison so that they can tie up as many resources of the enemy as possible. That's essentially what went down in Texas this week.
Yeah, let me tell you why Republicans are stupid, because you do stuff like this and you destroy our party from
Please,
within.
please. Yes,
Let me tell you why. Right, exactly. People think money is unlimited and it's not. And I hear too many Republicans, and I've heard it over and over again, but it's Texas. Republicans are going to win. Of course, we're probably going to win. But if there is a year a Democrat could pick up Texas, it is this year, because we are facing incredible headwinds. The political climate is horrible. Trump is driving the economy into the ground. If there's ever a chance that Democrats win Texas, it is this year. And like you pointed out, maybe it's just a 5-point race, but it becomes the most expensive race that we've ever seen in the history of American politics for Senate. And it probably cost us North Carolina, Alaska, probably Georgia we can't pick up. It is a disaster that we created on our own. It is pure stupidity.
And of course, the Texas story telescopes out to a larger problem that Republicans and the Trump administration now face, because Trump's staffing instability has collided with the political reality that he may no longer have a path to confirming controversial nominees or passing elements of legislation or his agenda that he needs to get through the Senate. We saw Tulsi Gabbard resign within the past week. Pam Bondi has still not been truly replaced as Attorney General. Suddenly, the administration is relying heavily on acting officials at the exact moment that several Republican senators have been kicked to the curb and are now nursing grievances against Trump and no longer fear political retaliation. Matt, walk us through the consequences of losing an effective governing majority. What weighs most on your mind?
We have now pushed the Republican agenda to a standstill. We are not going to get anything done for the rest of the year. There's no cabinet official that is not just pure and clean going to get passed. I'm guessing Bill Cassidy regrets his vote for RFK Jr. for HHS, because he thought that was going to be one of the things to curry favor with Trump and not get primaried and pushed out. And look what happened. So now we've lost Cassidy. We've lost Cornyn. He's threatening Murkowski next year, already threatening Susan Collins. And so where we're sitting is with a thin Republican majority that probably won't go along with him. And what that means is, again, if we have a Supreme Court vacancy, that is not going to be filled. And so we're sitting here stuck in neutral at the precise time that we need to be pushing an agenda forward. This is a huge problem for us.
Each one of these Trump acts of retribution, sidelining key potential Republican allies in the Senate feels like one of those old Bugs Bunny cartoons where there's a bomb and a fuse and you light the end of the fuse. It's not going off now. It's going to go off in the future. Right on the heels of Paxton winning, Trump turned around and threatened Lisa Murkowski. So why the heck is Murkowski going to carry water for this administration in the future? That is lighting the end of a fuse for a bomb that could go off when he needs Senator Murkowski the most next year. Maybe it's a Supreme Court nomination. Maybe it's a critical piece of legislation. Maybe it's a reconciliation bill. That's what you're beginning to see unfold. It's not necessarily the consequences. It's lighting the fuses.
I want to switch gears because I don't know if you know this, Matt. Donald Trump is perfectly healthy. He made his third trip. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. His third trip to Walter Reed for another physical, another checkup. And it continues to feel like all we keep is pushing out this idea that he's perfectly fine. Now, look, historically, presidents and their teams have hid serious conditions. They've minimized symptoms of selectively releasing information because the presidency is tied so heavily to perceptions of strength, stability, and competence. We had these questions with Biden. We've had these questions with past presidents on things that were not disclosed at the time. But I've seen a lot of pro-Trump figures on social media post things like he's superhuman, he's unstoppable, he's the healthiest guy in politics. I don't see that with my eyes. Matt, what do we believe here?
For one thing, I heard that the doctors at Walter Reed rated his potential lifespan as a 10, 9, 8, 7. I think that there's a poker tell effect happening here. The harder Trump and his allies exaggerate on any issue, the more suspicious one should be of what they're saying. Whenever Trump calls something great, the best ever. In this cabinet meeting that we're going to discuss shortly, they were talking about this is the greatest economy in the history of the world. That is an immediate translation into this is the worst economy that anyone can recall. The same thing pertains to his health. When they talk about him having superhuman strength, what they really mean is he's grievously ill. And there are Republican insiders who are saying this out loud. Rick Wilson posted on Substack this week. He thinks Trump is dying, not in the sense that we all are mortal, but in the sense that it could be imminent. If I could write a memo to all of the news media right now, what I would say is you need to change your baseline. You've long afforded political figures the grace to assume they're healthy unless we have evidence to the contrary. I think we've now seen enough pieces of evidence that the media should be coming at this from the assumption that he is seriously ill. And the burden of proof is now on Trump to demonstrate that he's not.
America has now suffered through 2 aging presidents with questions about their cognitive health and physical stamina. And I do think you're right. The media needs to start that questioning. What we're getting too much are things like what I'm seeing on True Social this week, that Biden passed 0 cognitive test and Obama passed 0 cognitive tests, and that Trump passed 3 cognitive tests, and that somehow means he's okay. The reality is we can see with our own 2 eyes Trump has fallen asleep. We can see the swollen ankles. We can see the bruises on his hands. It's time to ask the serious questions.
Don't you love the way that he keeps bragging about this? It would be like if someone said, I went to the doctor for the 12th time this year, and I once again aced my test for syphilis. Okay, so many visits to the doctor, sir. I referred a moment ago to this week's cabinet meeting, which produced one of the clearest public displays yet of how insulated Trump may be becoming from reality, from dissenting information, from anything that rocks his worldview, that he is the most successful president ever. Cabinet officials delivered lavish, almost theatrical praise, calling Trump the architect of the greatest economy the world has ever known and the singular leader capable of stopping Iran. All of this raises a deeper question, Matt. We've treated these kinds of cabinet meetings and kiss-assery from his cabinet officials as a suck-up story for years and years now. But I want to ask you, is that missing the real point?
It is missing the real point. Trump is living in an alternate reality. And we saw that in this cabinet meeting when he talked about the war in Iran and how Ken Paxton won. And so that means Americans support what's happening in the war. It's also where he threw out the line, I don't care about the midterms shortly after that, which is abundantly clear that he doesn't care about the midterms. But I think what we continue to see is that he is being fed almost like a child. Yes, you're doing a great job. Oh, that's a great picture you just drew of a butterfly. And the reality is, the world is blowing up around him. America is blowing up around him. He seems so disconnected with what is really happening because he has a cabinet that is spoon feeding this different reality. He doesn't get the real data. He doesn't really get the news. He only watches and sees the things that he wants to see. And as a Republican operative, where this really comes to play is the American public. That is not what they're seeing. They are seeing gas prices go up. They're seeing their food prices go up. They're seeing inflation is still rising every single quarter, it feels like. Trump seems to be more consumed with MMA fights, his picture on a $250 bill, and a new ballroom. And it's starting to feel like these cabinet meetings are more like a North Korea tribute video than a room's telling him what he needs to know to actually make good decisions.
We haven't just seen this kind of thing happen in authoritarian governments. We've seen it in the US. Nixon, in his final years, became increasingly insulated, didn't want to hear bad news about Watergate, about what was going on in Vietnam. We've seen it with Clarence Thomas. He doesn't read mainstream news, he reads far right journals, and it creates a distorted sense of reality. That seems to be what's happening with Trump. I think it is very fair to question whether Trump is even cognitively aware of how the war is going, what the state of the American economy is. And that brings into question whether he's really functionally leading American government at all anymore. And on that note, we want to introduce a new piece of our rundown segment where we try to tie everything together. Matt, if there's a dominant theme that's emerged for you, if there's something you've learned from the top stories driving the past week, what would it be for you?
Here's something we can all pick up. The narrative is that MAGA claimed another scalp and that Trump still dominates the GOP politically. But everything around him increasingly feels unstable, reactive, and personality driven. And this is where the media has gotten the story wrong. Trump is not the Godfather. He's not some all-powerful Don that's making these moves. He sounds more like Charlie Sheen in his winning era.
The people are doing exactly what they should be doing, which is watching me, because we have all the answers, we have all the goal, we have all the solution. And keep in mind, like anytime I roll something out, my plan is the best one in the room, and people are starting to wake up and realize that their plan is shit, my plan is gold. Walk into my plan and you're going to win. Winner.com.
That's the energy I felt this week. And so what I learned is that the only reason they keep following Trump is because MAGA is a cult and Republicans need to stop drinking the Kool-Aid or it's just going to kill the GOP.
I think my lesson from the week is that we're entering the stage of the authoritarian feedback loop. I invoked the metaphor earlier of it's like a cartoon bomb and lighting the end of a fuse. What we've seen is a brew of mixed messaging and fear-based loyalty. That's what was on display in the cabinet meeting. Performative praise, purges, retribution, informational isolation, and inability to admit weakness, and the hollowing out of institutions that are supposed to keep the gears of government grinding forward. And what's the bill that's come due just this week? The Iran negotiations becoming incoherent, choosing Paxton over Cornyn and him crushing, despite the electability risk that's going to come back and bite Republicans. The Senate confirmations becoming harder, the ability to pass any legislation of any kind becoming increasingly tenuous. And then, of course, these very weird performative moments on health and Trump's cognitive ability and grasp of reality. Think about that fuse. There's more and more bills coming. And that's that kind of authoritarian feedback loop that we're seeing spool out and spool out. That was the major lesson of the week for me. But of course, we haven't touched on one other story that's been driving the week, and that is the Democratic Party's autopsy, which was shambolic, but it also set up some really critical questions. Why did the Democrats lose? And how can they actually fix their problems if they want to win again in the future? So let's take a look at those questions in this week's Deep Dive.
Let's go beyond the headlines. It's time for a deep dive.
Over the past week, Democrats have been consumed by infighting, finger-pointing, and blame-storming after the Democratic Party released its so-called autopsy of what happened in the 2024 election and why Kamala Harris lost. What I want to do is cut through all of that and tell you quickly what the report got wrong, and then tell you exactly why Harris actually lost based on what the numbers actually say. And finally, let's take a look at the deeper problem that Democrats are really facing and why there's a good chance that they'll be able to solve it in the next couple of years if they focus on the right things. First, let's be clear that the report was basically gobbledygook. It was drafted by a political consultant who got half done with it, and then the party chairman, Ken Martin, decided he didn't like where it was coming together, so he tried to bury it. Then CNN leaked it, so then they released it anyway. Oh, Democrats. We always nail this kind of thing. For what it's worth, the few conclusions it did reach were focused on the wrong things. The report put most of the blame for Kamala Harris losing on all kinds of tactical decisions the pundits and political professionals tend to obsess about, They claimed that the messages didn't define Trump enough. They didn't go negative enough. Democrats didn't engage rural Americans or men, or didn't do enough digital ads. Let's just clear this up right now. None of this rearranging the deck chairs tells the real story. In fact, Kamala Harris did better than models would predict, according to Elliot Morris. If you take the most predictive numbers, which are basically the incumbent president's approval rating and how voters feel about the economy, Harris did about a percentage point better than she might have been expected to. So what were the real reasons Harris lost? An actual intelligent analysis conducted by Blueprint, a Democratic public opinion research group, tells the whole story right in the title. Why America Chose Trump: Inflation, Immigration, and the Democratic Brand. Boom, pretty simple. Their polling shows that the top 3 reasons voters chose not to vote for Harris were, in their words, inflation was too high under the Biden-Harris administration, too many immigrants were illegally crossing the border under the Biden-Harris administration, and, quote, Kamala Harris is too focused on cultural issues like transgender issues rather than helping the middle class. That last one was the most frequently cited criticism given among swing voters who broke for Trump. Inflation, immigration, and a liberal cultural brand. And again, none of this is that surprising. All around the world, incumbents took it on the chin in 2024 because of high prices. For the first time in recorded history, every single governing party facing election in a developed country lost vote share in 2024. But that brings us to the longer-term issue. And this is where Democrats should be a little nervous. This brand problem is real. Here's a test you can try out for yourself at home right now. Try to say out loud in just one sentence what the Democratic Party stands for. If you manage to do that, now try doing the test in a group of people out loud and get everyone to say their sentence at the same time. See if there's any overlap at all. I'll bet you there's very little. The truth is, voters have no idea what we really stand for, and because nature abhors a vacuum, Republicans and Fox News, as if there's a difference, have been all too happy to supply a brand for us. Trump's political right-hand man, James Blair, has issued the tagline that Democrats are weak, woke, and far too liberal. The fact is that we're having a hard time breaking away from that label. Take immigration, for example. It's true that border crossings rose significantly in 2021 through 2022. President Biden got a little too lax about the border for most Americans' tastes. But did you know that in 2023 he pivoted? Did you know that Biden had more deportations in 2024 than Trump did in 2025? It's true. You can look it up. Back in 2014, President Obama had twice as many as Trump did last year. But that's not the way that American voters see Democrats as leaders. And Kamala Harris was tied to that brand and couldn't work past it. But like I said at the top, there really is good news here. At least if you're a Democrat, because Democrats have been here before. In 1988, Michael Dukakis got crushed because of voter perceptions that Democrats were too weak and too liberal. Sound familiar? Between 1990 and 1992, Bill Clinton emerged from the primary process on the strength of running as a new Democrat. As a result, the entire brand of the Democratic Party shifted. That's what happens when parties pick a new leader. Party brands aren't built in a lab. They're built by a leader. So the good news is that right now, Democrats are in an ultra-strong position to be successful in the 2026 midterms. And then, even though the next presidential primary promises to be a painful process, that's a lot of P's, if the party can get through it, they'll have an opportunity to redefine their brand and move forward. One final note, a must-do item for the Democratic Party. I mentioned Bill Clinton a moment ago. If people remember anything about his campaign in '92, it's the campaign haiku that his advisor James Carville came up with. Change versus more of the same. The economy, stupid. And don't forget healthcare. It's that first part that really matters. Yes, of course, Democrats should continue to run on healthcare and the economy, duh. But change is the dominant theme in American politics, and it has been for decades. Since 1979, the median percentage of us who say we're dissatisfied with the way things are going in the United States has been 70%. In 2024, 53% of voters told pollster David Shore that things were going so poorly in America that what was needed goes beyond mere change. They wanted a shock to the system. 3/4 of voters told Navigator Research that the entire American political and economic system needs major changes or should be torn down completely. So Democrats need to remember this one thing. There are basically only two kinds of campaigns to run in American politics. You can say to voters, let's stay the course, or you can say, it's time for a change. The voters have been crystal clear which one they want. The take home: we need to clean up our brand, and Democrats need to become the party of change again. That's the challenge if we want to win in the future.
That was excellent. I love how you boiled that down into something that actually makes sense and cut through all that other bullshit that's out there. One of the things I want to pick up here on is that politics is not really about issues or even policy. It's a marketing campaign. I'm going to try to get you to buy a product. We use issues as a wedge, as a tool to get you to buy that product. The part about the brand is so important. You think about this as a Google review whenever you want to go to a restaurant and you think about going to dinner. If it's crap, you go somewhere else. And that was the fundamental problem, I think, you had with Harris. It was part Biden and his failures as president, but it's equal parts that we in the Republican Party branded him and tied it to Harris. And that's why the culture wars worked for us. That's why immigration worked for us. Is the reality is that we don't think Democrats really want to let in dangerous criminals into the United States. We know they don't want open borders, but winning elections is about convincing voters that they do. And look, the Democrats do it too. And I'm not saying it's uniquely Republican, but this is the game we play, and that's what the battlefield looks like. And that's why branding is such a key piece of what you talked about for the Democrats. And the one thing that can overcome a bad brand is really the economy. And if the economy is bad, the voters really want that change.
Let me pick up on your culture point and your brand point for just a second. You reminded me of 25 years ago, McDonald's tried to roll out a more sophisticated adult and higher quality burger. They called it the McDLT. It didn't work. Why? Because the restaurant selling it was McDonald's. They have a brand. The position that Harris occupied was she could sell policies that people individually would tell pollsters, yeah, I like that policy. I like it better. But it was a McDLT coming from McDonald's, right?
That's exactly right.
They didn't want to buy the burger because they're like, yeah, but it's coming from McDonald's. I just don't trust it. And that's the issue. We have to remember as Democrats that politics is downstream from culture. We have to address what we know are weak points. We don't have to throw groups that we affiliate with, identities that we affiliate with under the bus in order to be able to do it. We've already seen this with Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. She's someone who championed the Equality Act to secure federal non-discrimination protections for LGBTQIA plus Americans. She supports marriage equality. She also says, look, I'm the mother of 3 daughters. I think we should trust local communities to work out questions like, is it okay for a trans girl to be on one of their sports teams or not? And people were cool with that. If you can find a way to diffuse a position, like, for example, on immigration, there's a pretty clear path to do it. We're actually going to be tough on the border. We'll go after criminals, but we're not going to do any of this nonsense and authoritarian goon squad crackdown on Americans stuff that people hate. It's really not that hard to get right on these issues without shivving your allies. It's an absolute must do. But just to pick up on your point about change, if Democrats don't get that part right and become the party of change again, they're sunk, no matter what else they do.
Yeah, I think that's the key piece, because a lot of Republicans, especially MAGA, want to believe that Trump won this election because he had so much better issues and that people just love him. The reality is voters wanted change. They did not like the direction the country was going. And so it wasn't as much of a vote for Trump as it was against what was happening. One of the challenges they have is that some of the highest profile Democrats, people like AOC, people like Mondami, are pushing a different message, and the change they're pushing almost plays into the Republican hands. And so what's interesting about that autopsy and what's interesting about the analysis that you did is you stripped away kind of the bullshit side of this and said, this is where Democrats have to go. And quite frankly, if Democrats listen to you, Republicans should be very worried in 2028.
I'm glad you invoked bullshit, because this is usually the part in the show where we do the that's bullshit segment. But this week we felt like the deep dive rolled the bullshit right into it, because that's essentially what this autopsy was. But just to pick up on your point and even invoking Mamdani, what Democrats can take away from this is, okay, change. We've got to embrace change, but it can't just be like that Obama poster, which I included in this video from 2008. Change. Okay, what do you mean? it still has to connect to the core problem in voters' lives. So, step one, defuse the culture issues. Step two, embrace change, but make it specific, connect it to people's real economic pain. And there are plenty of great ideas for how to do that. We don't have to embrace all of Mamdani's solutions to learn the lesson that he's trying to teach, which is let's get directionally right, even if the details aren't quite right. So there are ideas out there. Lawrence Winterman, who I mentioned earlier in the show, suggests let's have taxation of some kind on AI agents. Every time you use a token when you're using AI, that should go into a fund which could fund wage support, job loss support for people who are displaced by technology. This is a real problem that affects people in communities all across America. What about actually the US? This is an idea that Trump has actually done. I actually think it's a good idea. What about taking a piece of the action on these frontier AI companies through a sovereign wealth fund? It's something that other countries have done and we could do as well. I'm not sure that any of those specifics is exactly right, but I do think that if Democrats take the core message here, which is we're going to deal with culture, we're going to embrace change, and we're going to connect it through economic ideas that really address people's problems. That's the pathway forward. That's what we need to do to get back in the game for 2028. And on that note, which I find particularly hopeful, maybe you don't quite so much, let's go to our weekly dose of hope.
It feels like America is completely splitting apart right now. Every day it's another outrage, another political food fight, another social media war where everybody acts like half the country is insane and the other half of the country is evil. And honestly, if you spend enough time online or watching cable news, you start to believe we have absolutely nothing in common anymore. But then I saw a story in the Washington Post. They wanted to find out what exactly do Americans dislike about the Democrat and Republican parties. So they asked more than 1,200 Americans to describe in their own words what they dislike most about both parties. And the weird thing is, a lot of us are frustrated by the exact same things. People are tired of politicians who feel fake, tired of the outrage replacing leadership, tired of loyalty tests, tired of politicians performing for cameras instead of solving problems. Tired of feeling like people in charge live in a completely different universe than everybody else. And maybe that's the hopeful part, because maybe America isn't actually two armies staring each other down across the battlefield. Maybe it's millions of exhausted people, Democrats, Republicans, independents, all looking at Washington and thinking this doesn't feel normal anymore. And look, we're still going to disagree. That's America. We always have, we always will. And that is good for our country. But disagreement is different than hatred, and frustration is different than division. The internet makes money convincing us our neighbors are the enemy. Politics makes money keeping everybody angry. Cable news makes money turning every disagreement into the end of civilization. But most people want roughly the same thing: stability, opportunity, safety, a government that feels at least somewhat connected to real life. And maybe that's worth remembering, because if Americans can still agree that the system feels broken, then maybe we're not quite as broken as we think we are.
Personally, I find comfort in the idea that the more things change, the more they stay the same. So in a week, when we were talking about the themes that we've covered in this show, Trump's ongoing medical mysteries and surprising visit to Walter Reed, the sucking up from Republicans beginning to exact a real toll on our government and our lives, and Stephen Colbert announcing that he was migrating from his late night show to YouTube, it was so delightful for me to find this forgotten clip of Stephen Colbert creating content on YouTube about Trump visiting Walter Reed to deal with sycophantic Republican toadies.
The White House continues to downplay President Trump's unexpected and unscheduled doctor's visit, and now there are new questions surrounding that mysterious checkup on Saturday.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Bill Farblah, Chief of Gastroenterology. I want to dispel any rumors about the president's unscheduled medical appointment at Walter Reed Hospital. It was a routine procedure. He is fine. Though during the exam, it was determined that the president had a blockage in his lower GI tract when it was discovered that several Republican members of Congress had lodged their heads in his quid pro hole. We immediately attempted to remove the GOP congressmen's heads, but once out, they would hear more Ukraine testimony and would dive back in there. The situation was much like puppies in a box. Eventually, using forceps, we were successful in extracting the heads of Jim Jordan and Devin Nunes. And as we speak, we are sending in a team of specialists to try to locate Lindsey Graham. He's way up there.
Yes, history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. And this is definitely a case of a man from Nantucket. And there's a deeper point here because this video is from 7 years ago. And it shows that the bill comes due. We were just talking last week about what's going to become of political satire and comedy. And this particular piece of comedy demonstrates why political humor is still relevant, can often be strangely predictive, and why I, for one, am going to be tuning in to Colbert's new channel to see if I can get another postcard from the future. I hope he does one about Trump in prison. And on that hopeful note, for Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.